The reforms of the 4th century by Diocletian and Constantine the Great that revitalized Rome after its crisis in the 3rd century seemed a distant cry in the 380s. Indeed, even the great work of Valentinian I in the 360s seemed a far cry to the Rome of the 380s. With Gratian, his son, and Valentinian II ruling over the West, they were not reliable nor popular because of their beliefs and ideas, especially among the Christians. Meanwhile, Valens had completely embarrassed himself in the East. Being the older uncle to look over his nephews in the West, he had failed to look over his own army, and had been totally decimated at the Battle of Adrianople in 378 by Fritigern, a Goth who had originally served for the Roman Empire but had turned on them when he had received lack of payment, and with his Gothic hordes had invaded the Roman Empire and brought them to their knees. The defeat at Adrianople in 378 cost Valens his security, his power, and his life, as the barbarians overwhelmed the Roman forces, and then turned their eyes and attention towards Constantinople. With the barbarian threat mounting and Valens securely out of the way, an imminent collapse of the Roman Empire seemed very likely, just as it had a century prior. It would need a great ruler to turn back the tide on its chaos and decadence, the fall of its power and prestige, the weakness of its armies, the low birth rates, the large barbarian hordes continuing to swarm its cities and invade, and now threatened Constantinople, the new Rome of Constantine, the new capital built right at the straits of the Black Sea. Indeed, the city of Constantine the Great was in danger from the barbarian hordes, as was the Western Roman Empire with its own capital at Milan, no longer Rome, which was the eternal city, the capital of both the East and the West. Eventually, the Western Roman Empire would move to Ravenna in the early 5th century, its final capital. But the Roman Empire was divided and seemed ready to fall. But things only got worse after Valens' death, as Gratian was usurped and murdered in 383 by Magnentius Maximus, the greatest of the great. He kept the unpopular Valentinian, a heretic to the Christians, as his puppet, and Rome cowered in distress. It needed a great ruler like Constantine. It needed a great ruler even like Valentinian, and it got it in the form of Theodosius. A general who had run Valens' armies soon revitalized the eastern half of the empire, making deals with the barbarians and the Sassanids in order to keep the peace in Rome. Throughout the 380s, he stabilized the Eastern Roman Empire and decided that the best way to do this was through his spirituality and deep religious conviction. The unifying force would be Trinitarian Christianity as defined at the Council of Nicaea. The old days where they were targets of the lions and of the persecutions of Nero's circus seemingly were over. They had been legalized as a sect by Constantine, and they were the largest growing force in the empire, and Constantine was well aware of their influence. Supposedly, he had received the symbol of the cross, put it on his soldier shield, and used it to win the great battle of the Milvian Bridge in 311. With the Edict of Milan in 313, he legalized Christianity and sat in at their council at Nicaea in 325, which declared that Christ was of the same substance as the Father. The theological issue of the divinity of Christ was no longer a religious issue, but a political issue, with Constantine sitting in on their conference. And yes, he accepted baptism at his death. And with only the interruption of Julian the Apostate, who failed to try to bring Rome back to its pagan ways, the empire had become thoroughly Christianized. In both status and birth rate, they outpaced the growth of the pagan Romans, and the emperors were either ostensibly or deeply Christian. And for Theodosius, it was deeply. He not only trusted the message, but he believed strongly that it could bring cohesion to his empire, and cohesion it did bring. Theodosius made Christianity the official religion of the empire in 380, and his new peace treaties and stabilized borders revitalized the eastern half of the empire and brought about a veritable golden age for Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire, and its Greek-speaking population, which would come to dominate compared to the feeble and weakening Western Roman Empire during the 5th century. The unsteady peace with the barbarians, however, would turn out to be a mistake, as the precarious resettlement of the barbarians in Roman lands would lead to more invasions and incursions and wrath from the barbarians when they were not paid properly for their military services, leading to more ravaging of the Western Empire and its eventual decline. Over the next century, the barbarians would tear the Western Roman Empire apart as the East flourished. But prolonging the issue, Theodosius preferred an unsteady peace to long, turbulent warfare. His real war would be with fellow Romans, and he would make sure that yet another Roman civil war would end with him as the victor, and in glory as the sole ruler of Rome. Declaring himself emperor in 383 and leading the legions out of northern Gaul and Britannia, probably forever, Magnus Maximus had overthrown and killed Gratian and subordinated Valentinian II. Theodosius answered with war, a civil war that would last 5 years and ensure that Magnus Maximus would never be the emperor of all of Rome. Defeating Maximus, Theodosius restored Valentinian II, establishing the sickly youth as a puppet to do his bidding in the West. When the 22-year-old youth died in 393, Theodosius assumed control of both the East and the West, becoming the final Roman emperor to rule over both, in one of the most successful and accomplished feats, especially for that time. The large lands of Augustus, Trajan, and Constantine were now his. With the barbarian hordes at bay, the Roman civil war over, peace and stability reigning throughout the empire, and Christianity dominating the culture, Theodosius had nothing but to enjoy his time as the emperor, and also to select an heir. Creating a new dynasty, the Theodosian dynasty, he decided to divide the empire between his sons, Arcadius to rule in the east, and Honorius to rule in the west. Both were horrifyingly disappointing and incompetent. Their horrifying reigns do little to take away from the grandeur of their father, who passed away in 395, the last man to rule over all of Rome.